welcome everyone. Thank you for coming along and having a look at this. Very pleased to be presenting all the way from Australia, and this is being presented as Start Making Sense. My name's David Head and my company is YouLearn IT, and I've got the full rundown of being a certified developer and trainer, and have been working in FileMaker for way too long, over 30, 40 years now. Just to start off with level setting where we're at with this. This presentation, I'd like to be a bit of a discussion. It includes a lot of my opinions and thoughts about how things should be done in FileMaker. And the important thing here is that there's nothing wrong with being wrong, and that includes me. I have no doubt that some of the things I say will be wrong, and I'm happy to have the discussion with people about what's wrong about it and what I should change in my own practice in terms of moving forward. Charlie Munger, a close partner of Warren Buffett, said, when a better tool comes along, what would be better than to swap it out for your old, less useful tool? And he and Warren often do that, but there are a lot of people who tend to cling to these old, less useful tools. And in FileMaker, it often comes out in terms of me asking people, why do you do that? And they go, well, I've always done that. But that's about the only reason they have for doing it. Again, from Ryan Holiday from the Daily Stoic, that no one should be ashamed at changing his mind when someone points out a legitimate flaw in your belief or in your actions. They're not criticising you, they're simply presenting an alternative. So you should accept it, or at least consider it. A couple of other little quotes here. You're not your idea, and if you identify too closely with your ideas, you'll take offence when they're challenged. So the things that you do and the way that you do them, for example, specifically in FileMaker, aren't necessarily your idea. I don't think most of us here have come up with a completely original technique or method of doing things. So it's not for us to actually attach ourselves too closely to that method and say, well, I invented this, so that's why I'm going to keep doing it. Because if you do, as Ed says, you probably become very attached to that, and it's sort of like someone calling your baby ugly. So if you can detach yourself from your ideas and be able to let go of them when you find that they're not the best. So for Mark Anderson, be ruthlessly open-minded, constantly willing to re-examine your assumptions and take the ego out of ideas, which is a very hard thing to do. In the same way as Ed said, the ego associated with ideas means that it's a lot harder to let go of them. So this is something that was introduced by Nick Orr at the recent Reconnect conference when he was presenting his sort of ideas, and it was a thing coined by Paul Sappho, who's a technology forecast or futurist, works at Stanford University part-time as well. And it's the idea of having strong opinions weakly held. The idea here is that when you think of something, as Paul says, allow your intuition to guide you to a conclusion, or in the case of FileMaker, maybe guide you to a method, no matter how imperfect that is. And hold that as an opinion, as the way things should be done. And then the weakly held part is to prove yourself wrong or have someone prove you wrong and be prepared to let go of that. So that's where we're at with a lot of these things. Some of these things that you'll see as we go will be to do with this is what I think, what do you think, and should I think differently? So what we'll be covering in this session, looking at FileMaker developer practices, mainly looking at areas of scripting, but also calculations, layouts, general sort of approaches to programs, my conventions, my methods, my opinions, and as I've said a number of times, they're all arguable, all negotiable in terms of what you might think. or other people might think. So, hold on to your hats. Let's start with scripting. Let's start with a controversial thing. Actually, before we start with that, let's sort of just ask the question, has anyone read this book? I have a copy of it sitting here right next to me. And I thought when I was preparing for this, it's probably time for me to read it again. It's a quite nice, thick book on software construction, and it's got a lot of interesting points and questions and ideas about how you should construct code. It doesn't mention the word FileMaker once, but a lot of it is directly related to how we do things in FileMaker. So I certainly recommend getting hold of a copy of that if you've never seen it before. So it covers things like applying principles of programming to any programming. So it's not a JavaScript book, it's not a C# book, it's not a Python book, but all of those sort of things fit into this what it covers, and it's got examples in lots of different programming languages. So scope and persistence, error handling, all these sort of things, the way that you should approach these things generally, regardless of the language, or in our case, the platform. So here's the controversial thing. My contention is, don't do this. Don't always start every script with allow user abort off. Don't always start every script with a set error capture on. And don't always end them with an open exit script. Anyone want to leave now?
I totally agree.
When we look at these things, is we've got to understand what these things do and understand how they work. So let's just talk about persistence. The first thing here is that these two script steps set the current script state, and that state is maintained between all the called and the calling scripts. So here's an example. What is the error capture state at each of those marker points? So we've got script A calling script B, calling script C, and coming back again. So most of us would understand that at number one, the error capture is off, because that's the default state of error capture in FileMaker full stop. But the first thing that this script does is to turn the error capture on. Then it does a couple of things. It performs script B. So it calls script B. So what is the error capture state at the start of script B? Some people may assume that it's off because that's the starting point for every script. But in fact, it inherits that state because that's the state that's been set by the calling script. So at the start of script B, in the absence of setting the error capture on, error capture is on. The first thing that script B does is to call script C. So what's the error capture state at the start of script C? Well, of course, it is also on. When script C finishes and passes back to script B, the error capture state is still on, and it passes back to script A, and it's still on for the rest of the script. So by setting error capture on in one script, it basically runs through the entire script. So one would argue there's no need to set error capture on at the start of every script anyway, because if you call those scripts, it's going to be on if that's what you really wanted. Now, what would happen if B was not called by A? What would be the error capture state at the start of script B? Well, of course, it would be off, because that's the standard starting script or starting state for any script. Then it calls C. So because it's off in C as well. C runs in the state of off, and it passes back to B, and it's off. So in this case, because B was not called by A, the error capture has not been turned on at any stage, and therefore is off by default. Now, in this final example, I've tweaked script C a little bit, and this is where confusions happen, where we start the script series and the error capture state is off. We go to script B and it's on because it's been turned on by script A. We go to script C and it's on because it's been turned on by script A and inherited into this series. But then during script C, error capture is turned on, and it was already on anyway, and then it was turned off. So then the question is, what is the state in script B? And of course, the answer is it's off, because that is setting the state for the entire series of these scripts running. And then, of course, when you get back to script A, it's also off. So once you understand how these get inherited and the persistence of this sort of state, that's all well and good. But what about these other things like perform script on server, our new perform script on server, introduced in 21.1, and also this perform script on server with callback scripts? What happens here? So if script A, for example, was running on the FileMaker client and it called script B with perform script on server, what would be the state of the error capture at the start of script B, given that A was running error capture on? And the answer is it's off, because the perform script on server is a completely new session and it has its own stuff and it doesn't inherit any error capture state. The same thing if you've got perform script on server with callbacks. When that callback script runs on the client, it will not have an error capture state. It will be off by default. So it won't inherit effectively the error capture state from A or B when that callback script runs, because it's effectively a new thread that's actually being started up. And the same thing happens with perform script on server. If script B is running on the server and it calls script D also to run on the server, that's a whole new session, therefore it doesn't inherit the error capture state. So it's important to understand how all of these things sort of work through to understand what you need to do with these things. But ULearn-OT best practice is basically to say you set the script step or you set the state explicitly when you need it to be set in a certain way. And then when you finished with that, you reset it. So it's like the old thing of, if you open the drawer, then close it. If you turn something on, then turn something off. And it comes here to the principle of proximity when we talk about if you put script steps close to where they're being used, it's easier to read the whole script. So it is a design principle for making your code easier to understand and interpret as to exactly what's happening at any point in that code. With some of the previous examples, if you turned error capture on at the start and you just assumed that it was going to be inherited through the called scripts, it's very hard to look at one script on its own and understand what the error capture state might or might not be. Because in the case of script B, the error capture state was on in the first example and it was off in the last example. So it was off for the remainder of the script in the last example. So
Robert has a question.
Question?
Yeah, Robert.
Yes, I'm sorry. I didn't want to interrupt. So if you're open to questions, I'm just curious because on the error capture side of things, you had a slide with the server side execution, right? And I didn't pay attention closely to what it's mostly used for, but in my case, it's mostly to avoid the the error message being shown in a dialogue, right? So server side, as there's no one behind the keyboard, I've never been really watching about what's the error capture state server side, and that made me curious, like if there is something specific there that makes it so you had a dedicated slide with server side and and error capture?
Yeah. My understanding with the server-side state is, first of all, when you call this script B on the server, it will run up its own session, and obviously the script will start with error capture off. You can specifically turn error capture on, but of course, because it's running on a server, there are going to be no dialogues anyway. So it really doesn't have any impact on suppressing any dialogues that might come up, because they're not going to come up anyway. To my research, the only thing that error capture on does on the server side is it affects unknown script steps. So on the server side, if error capture is off and the script comes across an unknown script step, which are few and far between, then it will actually stop the script. The script will stop altogether.
I see. Thank you.
I mean, it really comes down to a level of testing to make sure that you're not running scripts server side that have any of those sort of things. But no, sometimes I hear the argument that you should really put in that error capture on just to make sure that my scripts on the server don't stop early. My response to that is, well, you didn't test it properly in the first place. You don't need that if you test it properly. Okay, so we look at something like this. Here's a real example of a script that I've written, and this is where I use error capture. So in this case, we've got error capture basically wrapped around the constrained found set, and the primary reason for doing this is to suppress that error message to say no records found. So there is the potential for that constrained found set to not find any records to constrain, therefore it might throw an error message. So we wrap it in error capture on and then error capture off. So we know exactly here that before that line 68, error capture is off, and after line 70, error capture is on. It's very easy to understand the state of this script. So the question is, what about line 67? Why didn't I push that error capture on up to 67 just in case there was an error there? There are a number of reasons for that. One is that the go to related record failing isn't going to show me any dialogue anyway, and suppressing that error isn't going to stop the error. So there's no reason to error capture line 67. It won't actually do anything. Just like having the entire script run with an error capture state of on is not going to do anything. When we look at this sort of stuff, you look at this and say, all right, so I'm running into creating a new window on line 20. I'm entering find mode. I'm setting a field and I'm performing the find. So the question is here, why didn't I wrap the perform find inside a set error capture on, set error capture off? Because there might be an error there. And the answer is line 18, the only reason I don't set that there is because prior in the script, I've established that there is actually a quote that exists with that quote ID, and therefore I don't need to error capture that state. So I only use it when I need to use it. On the subject to allow user abort off, we don't have the time to go into all the ins and outs of what that script step actually does, but the question is, what will this prevent? And the answer is that it will prevent the user from pressing cancel in the print dialog box and getting that message to say, printing has been cancelled, do you want to continue or no, stop this script? So that's a nicety from the user's point of view, that they can cancel the script without then having to decide, do I actually keep running with the script? Because most users don't know what a script even is, and so they don't know what question they're being asked. So it effectively prevents them from halting the script, but it still gives them the option to cancel printing at that point. So the question is, why didn't I start that on line 15? Why didn't I wrap the sort records and the print setup inside that allow user abort? And the answer is that both of those script steps run with dialog off, so I don't need it there. So I only put these script steps in where they're needed, turn them on or off when I need to, turn them on or off when I've finished using them. The other point,
David, question.
Yep.
Can you go back 1 second?
Yep.
So in this case, if you allow the user to abort the print,
Yes.
then they're basically aborting the whole script.
No.
No, they continue with the rest of the script.
Yeah. So what will happen there is that if they press cancel on the print dialog box,
Right.
it will simply not ask them the question, what do you want to do now?
Okay.
Which is cool. And which is exactly what I want to happen. I want the user to have the option of saying, do you want to print? Here's a print dialog box. No, you can print if you want to, but they go, oh, I don't want to print. What I saw wasn't what I needed. So I'm just going to press cancel like I normally do if I do a manual print, but it's not then going to come up with some weird dialog box to say, printing's been cancelled. Do you want to continue with this script? And they don't even know they're running a script because they just pressed the button to get a report.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
So I've seen this sort of habit that people have got into with ending every script with exit script. Now, I'm not here to argue that it's harmful in any way. It's absolutely zero harm to do that at the end of your scripts. My point is that it's redundant. You don't need an exit script at the end of the script. It's like you get to the end of the script runs and you go exit script and the script says, yeah, I was just about to do that. So I don't really need you to tell me to do that. In my opinion, the only reason you should be using exit script is to pass a script result or to end a script before it will naturally end at the end of a script. So say in the result of an if test. So if you do use exit scripts, I would ask you to consider always setting a text result. So if you exit the script, at least exit it with something that can be possibly tested somewhere else to say this is what happened. So if you, for example, enter the script early because an if test failed, you could say exit script, no records found or something like that, or exit script, no products found. That may not ever be used, but at least you're documenting your script in the way that you're saying, well, we're exiting the script because this happened. Are we sweating yet?
I think Beverly, she's clapping.
Not yet.
Hopefully all of that was a little bit controversial. Happy to discuss that now.
David, can I just... Oh, sorry. David, Can I make a comment if you go back to the last slide?
Yep.
Exit script with nothing doesn't reset the... Sorry, you may have... I missed that, did you?
Sorry?
Exit script with nothing is not the same as exit script with empty quotes.
No.
It's basically what it's...
Yeah, correct.
Yeah, because I learned the hard way. It doesn't reset if you do exit script with nothing, it doesn't reset the value of get script result, which is a hard lesson to learn.
Yeah. So the convention might be to say that never ever put in an exit script without a text result of some sort.
That's what I was trying to imply. Yep. Thank you.
Hey, let me jump in and say, first off, awesome presentation so far. And one, totally agree with everything. Exit script, sometimes I'll throw an exit script with just a one, so it can hang a debug, what's it called? A debug link, a breakpoint.
Yeah.
So I can see what the heck happened before it, goes to something else, and I can see the variables, but carry on.
Possibly, yeah. I've heard that argument before. I would say, why don't you put in an enter browse mode or something like that? But it can certainly be used. And if you're using it for that reason, then it probably shouldn't be there in your live file. But there you go. All right. Let's have a look at some things so controversial.
I wanted to go back as well, just 1 second.
Yeah.
exit script, I actually asked to see if we could add another bit of functionality to this. This only exits with the text result. And I was hoping that we would have an exit script adding another variable or parameter that gives you exit script based on a condition. So this just get like if you say exit script result is true, it's not going to exit the script because that's just getting you the result. But I don't know if others would like to see that, but I thought sometimes it would be nice to be able to say, under this condition, I want you to exit the script, and this is the result I want you to pass.
So
like exit loop if.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So you're asking for exit script if.
Yes, or just add the logic here, add another calculation that gives it the exit calculation.
Because of course we can do exit script if, but it just requires 3 lines. So we have to do if, do the test, and then exit script, then end if. So if we build that into one script step called exit script if, job done. I think it's a good feature request.
Thank you.
Okay, looking at script parameters, how many parameters are there? If there's a single parameter, then just pass it. Don't stuff around with any complicated JSON or anything like that. Just get your script parameter, put it in there, pass it. If there are multiple, my convention these days is to use a JSON object. So I'll just bundle all of those script parameters into a JSON object and pass them. Once they get to the script, then I always unload them at the start of the script. And this gives you a name for every script parameter. So when you're looking at a single parameter that's being passed, you've got the get script parameter that's being passed into this variable called action. So it means that during my script, I can say if action equals this, or if action equals that, or if action equals other, rather than saying if get script parameter equals this, or get script parameter equals that. So it means that I've named the thing and it makes my code more readable. When you're unloading from JSON, you're doing something like this, where you've got the parameter being unloaded to start with into a variable. And you might argue that P should be the word parameter, but it's unloaded into a variable, and then you progressively unload all the bits of that JSON and give them names. So this leads us to my favorite thing with scripting is being able to create a script and have that script do lots and lots of different things based on, in this case, an action. So we've got here a script called select product with an action parameter. And in my script, it says, this will manage selections of products. And there is an action parameter, and these are the sort of actions that you can do. So the first thing we do is we unload the get script parameter into the action variable, and we go from there. So this is how it works in practice. On the left-hand side here, we've got the UI to say, all right, we can go through from a list of products and we can select those products off there simply by clicking in a dot. So the sort of states that you might see here are no product selected, every product selected, and some products selected. So up here, we've got either an empty circle, a circle with a tick in it, or a circle with a dash in it, representing these 3 different states. So we can go through and click this circle, and that will select all the records, or click this circle now, it would deselect all the records. Clicking this dash would deselect all the records, and we can turn on and off every record individually. So it looks here like there's one button in the header, and there's one button in the body for each of the records, but in fact, there are 3 buttons in the header and 2 buttons in the body. So this is a button bar that has 3 segments to it, and each of these segments is controlled with visibility so that any one segment will only be visible at any one time. So you can see here the visibility calculations for each of those buttons. And if you work that out, it means that it's impossible for 2 buttons to be showing at any time. It's impossible for no buttons to be showing at any time. So only one of those buttons will show at any time. And the same thing in the record itself. In the body part, there are 2 buttons here, and these are set to say if the pattern count equals that, then hide that button. If it doesn't equal that, then hide the other button. So again, for a record, only one of those segments of the button will be shown. But what you'll find for all of these 5 segments is that they are all running the same script. They are simply running it with a different parameter. Deselect all, select one, select deselect one, deselect all, select all. So that's how it works. This is the script. And obviously it's a very simple script. Up in line 5, we're putting the parameter into the action. We're selecting one, and we're using a global field and simply compiling a list of UUIDs. And we're just saying, is this record in the UUID list? If it is, then we're going to do things from a visibility point of view. And right down the bottom of this, we've got this else, at the end of all that stuff, else show custom dialog, invalid or missing parameter. Now, this is an error not for the user. This is an error for the developer, and this error will only ever be seen when the developer makes a mistake and they test their code. So the sort of mistake that I generally make that makes this come up is that I misspell one of these parameters, or I forget to put a parameter in at all. But other than that, the user will never, ever, ever see this dialog box. It's purely used for testing in terms of I've done something wrong in providing a parameter. Another example of a multifunctional script that I use all the time is in nudging card windows, and this is a technique that you might consider. When you have a card window, you might know the default position of that card window is in the middle of the parent window. You can obviously position it wherever you want it to be, but when it comes up in the middle of the parent window, it may cover relevant parent data, so people maybe sort of know what's behind the card window. So an affordance for users when you bring up a card window is to allow them to use their arrow keys on the keyboard to actually nudge that card window around. And it's a hidden feature, admittedly, but when you know, you know. So it's one of those things that you come to assume that if there's a card window hiding something, I'll be able to use my arrow keys to nudge it around. And this script is triggered on layout keystroke for the card window itself. So this is the script. It's basically working on keystrokes, the trigger keystrokes for each of these keys, 28 or 27 basically through to 31, because there's a bonus here that if key code equals 27, the escape key, then it closes the window. So we can use this as a multifunctional script to say we're not passing multi-parameters in here, we're passing multiple keys in here, and we've got an if statement to do all of that sort of stuff. Now, the question is, what's wrong with this script based on what I've said previously? And the answer is that there's nothing in there to show me that I've done something wrong. So if I, for example, pass in the wrong key code, it's not going to show me any error. That may or may not be a problem with this script. In fact, that's the real script and that's how it works. But people may have some things to add or subtract from that script. Okay, just a side note then, I advise myself every time I develop a database to create a globals table. And this is where I store all the global fields that are not needed in relationships. So global fields that aren't needed to filter relationships or something like that. It's a one record table because I also put a UUID in here for reasons of linking things together. And there can be a range of global fields in here, some of which are free use globals, and they can be used for anything you want. And therefore, there's no guarantee of what might or might not be stored in them. And then there are specific use globals, and we've got comments for their usage, and they are specifically used for a specific thing, and they shouldn't be used for other processes, and they shouldn't be used by other people for other processes. So when you start looking at my global table, you'll see things like this. So for all of these are global fields, and you'll see that some of these global fields are repeating fields. Some of these global fields are repeating fields. So I've got a search field here, and it's used to store search criteria. So I can store up to 10 search criteria, just pop them across into a global field somewhere, and then be able to get them back as I need them. So there are lots of fields here that I can use through a lot of different things. Some of these, generally the things like the temp container fields, the temp fields, are the general use fields. Use them for whatever you want. So if you want to store a number temporarily, you're probably going to put it into a repetition of this field somewhere. The fact that these are global fields means that it's totally multi-user. So it means I can just pop stuff into there. I don't need to clutter up all of my tables with global fields. They're all stored in a central location. I can access them from anywhere within this file, any process I want. So I'd certainly recommend that to you as a process, because you saw when I was doing this previous script that I was using a global field here to drop all of the IDs into, and that's just stored away inside the globals table.
Can I add one comment about global container fields? Mm-hmm. So I was at a DevCon a few years back where Chris Irvine went up to Clay and said, I watch, Wireshark, and every time I put some, file in a global container, I see network traffic. Like, why is that? And Clay answered and said, that's old code where basically we actually transfer the file to the server. So you'd think globals are local, with the exception that global containers are actually transferring data to the server.
Wow.
So like you think, okay, you want to provide an interface for a user to drop like some big graphic image file into some global container. And then you do that and you say, oh, why am I getting this beach ball? And you're waiting. It's actually transferring the file to the server. So just note that, there's ways to work around that. But, if you're thinking, I'll put it in a global field and then I'll put it, and then a script, I'll have a button to click the button and then add it to a record that isn't a table. Well, you're actually moving the file twice.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Interesting.
Anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not documented anywhere.
Yeah. Jim Branham has a comment.
Go ahead and unmute and ask.
Okay. I thought one of the dangers of using globals is not clearing them when you need them to be cleared, and you run a copy locally outside a FileMaker server, and inherits, at least the older versions. I'm not sure that behavior has changed in the latest ones, since I'm still working with clients running older versions, but inherits whatever the last state of that global was when you last ran it on the desktop, as it were, under FileMaker Pro Client locally. So you want to be real careful. So what I've been doing is including the last window close, clearing of the globals that I know for sure absolutely need to be cleared, because many of my customers like to use retained values in their globals instead of launching them from, say, a resource file that has them as in real records. So just as an advisor, otherwise every user is going to inherit what you last did. And especially if you have some security related things in there, that could be deadly.
Absolutely. I there are a couple of points that I would make there. One is that you need to be well, when you're using this platform, you need to be cognizant of how things work, and not just how you think things work, how things actually work. So, the points like Vince just made in terms of global container fields and how they work, that's a relevant thing to understand. The other thing, the technical thing with global fields is people say, well, they're stored in the session. And the answer is that they're not actually. There is actually a thing in every table called record 0, which is the first record before record 1. So when you have a table that has 0 records in it, there is actually a record there, and that's where all the global values are stored. And that's how they're able to be accessed by unrelated tables. But yeah, it's certainly one of those things, whether you're using global fields or global variables, that you've got to be understanding as to whether you actually put those values in there or they actually turned up from somewhere else. And it's reasonable to assume that when you host the file that all these globals are empty, but you certainly can't assume that. So when you're using these things, there certainly needs to be some processes here to explicitly clear fields before you use them, if you think that they might contain something that you don't want to be there.
Let me jump in, and someone, not me, figured out a way to reset hosted globals, and then in the LA group, FM Disk, somebody did a 5-minute presentation on how to do it, and I dropped a link to that. So anyway, good conversation.
Thank you.
Sorry, David. I can't find the raise hand button. I'm not being rude. I've even Googled it, and it's saying that I need to update my Zoom or something else.
Yeah.
I just wanted to throw in a concept that you're talking about global fields here, and there may be the concept of shifting to global variables rather than global fields. And I just wanted to add a real world anecdote where I've taken over a system where the developer is using over 200 global variables at startup rather than global fields. And the ability to try to troubleshoot that, and let's say a lot of them are to do with permissions, and the developer themselves have said they would never do it again. They've gone the wrong direction. But just thinking that a global variable is the new way of doing it because it was introduced in the FileMaker later, it misses out on a whole lot of functionality that you have in using global fields in a control table that you just don't get with global variables. You really don't. There's always the pros and cons, and you've always taught us to understand the two differences and then pick which one makes sense to you.
And don't worry about it. I've got a slide on global variables. Stand by for that controversy.
So truncating the table, that won't get rid of the global variables either?
No, because that doesn't get rid of record 0.
No, and this concept of record 0 really helps explain what happens and how the global fields work, whether you're searching, whether there is no record and you still have in that table and you have record 0, whether or not you're trying to interact with a layout that doesn't have a record in the current found set, but you have global fields in the layout. It will give you a better idea of what's happening from that point of view.
Okay, window management. Few things here. If you create a new window, give it a name. You can certainly, whether you create a new window by the new window script step or you create a new window through go to related records, you can certainly give the window a name. If you do that, it makes it more explicit in your coding for what you intended that window to be used for. So you look at the script step up here, new window, it's a document window, and it's going to be the product picker window. So I understand when I read my code that the new window is the product picker window. And it goes towards being explicit in your coding and saying, this is why I intend this window to be used for. So when you close a window, you specify which window you're going to actually close. So rather than saying, I'll just close the current window, because I'm assuming that I'm in the right window here and I'm going to close it, that has bitten me in the past where I've said, close the current window, and it wasn't actually the window that I wanted it to close. So if you say close the window called product picker, then you know you're closing the right window, whether it's the current window or not. Again, it's more explicit and it signals your intent as to what you actually wanted to close, rather than just saying, yeah, close whatever window you're on at the moment.
Don't you get an error from that if you specify a window that doesn't exist?
Yes, you do. But you're going to pick that up in your testing and you're going to correct that error.
Okay.
So if you explicitly opened a window with a name called product picker and you specifically closed a window called product picker and you get an error because that window doesn't exist, then that means that in between there, you've done something wrong. So you're going to pick up that error. You don't have to test for that error because you're going to pick up that error in your coding during testing. When you close a window and you select a window, I found a thing the other day where closing a window, I always assume that if I open the window and then I close it, I'll be back on the window where I started. And that happens 99% of the time. But there was a use case where you don't end up on the right window. If you open a window and there's a floating window existing and you close that window, you'll end up on the floating window. So what FileMaker does is the windows are stacked in order. So when you open up a window, it will open up in front of the window that you just opened. So if you close that window, it will go back to that window that you opened it from. But if you are explicit in this, then you always will be opening, or you will always be closing the window that you intend to close, and you will always end up on the window that you intend to end up on. So instead of just saying select window, or instead of just saying close window and assuming that you end up on the correct window, pair that with a select window and specify the window that you want to go back to. And if necessary, you could even set a variable to say, this is the window that I'm starting on. Now I open up a new window and now go back to that window that I started on. So it means that you end up with far more explicit code rather than having a whole bunch of new windows, closed windows, and assuming that things are going to be right. There is a degree of programming and window management here. Speaking of which, off-screen window management. I mean, we're all used to this technique where we actually spawn a window off-screen so that we can do things in that window and not have to worry about the user seeing screen flashes or things like that. Please, please give yourself an easy way to get them on screen when you are troubleshooting. I inherited a system that does this. So it goes to a related record, it opens up a new window. So the new window is called off-screen, and it is 5,000 from the top and 5,000 from the left. So it's sort of up there somewhere. A lot of times when I'm troubleshooting the scripts and trying to work out what's going on, I need to see what's happening in that off-screen window. So it's very frustrating to me to actually have to pull that off-screen window on screen. So give yourself a way to do that. And there are a couple of ways to do it. An obvious way is to say at the start of the script, you can set a couple of variables for what that position should be, and then use those variables when you're positioning this off-screen window rather than using hard-coded values. that means that when you're troubleshooting this script, I can simply set these values to 0 for troubleshooting purposes, run the script, and that off-screen window will not be an off-screen window, and I can see what's going on, and then I can reset it back to -5,000 when I'm ready. The other thing is that you could possibly use globals, a global field value, to actually position the top and the left for all off-screen windows. So you could just pop that into a global field, and you could use that, and then you could reset that global field, and all your off-screen windows become on-screen while you're troubleshooting.
I might use that set variable, paired it with a debug setting. I'm in debug mode. I logged in. My set variable then becomes if debug, then it's 0. Otherwise, it's that off-screen position. Works very well.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, so give yourself a way, rather than hard coding these -5,000s into your new windows, to be able to pull those back on screen easily.
Along the same lines, if you've got an off-screen window, we also use a technique to unhook a card window from its parent window, so that then we can go right away. Once we unhook it into a document window, then, we see an issue with the card window. So rather than close the card, go look at the layout, go find the layout that the card is on, and then go edit it that way, what we do is we just unhook the card window, it becomes a document window, and we dive into layout mode to correct it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah. There are a few of these sort of techniques, just in terms of being able to debug stuff, that everyone needs to think about when they're using these. Okay, clearing or repeating fields. No, repeating fields are not something that you should be using generally, but you'll see that I'm using repeating fields in my global table, and I use them a lot for chucking stuff into. They're very, very, very useful for just chucking stuff into. So we can have a global repeating field that might have 10 repetitions in it. And this goes to the sort of process to be able to clear those things out. You can't use a simple set field to clear a repeating field, because that will only clear the first repeat. What we need to do is actually clear every single repeat in that. And we can do that with an index. So we can say that, obviously, in this case, an action, this is a multifunction script. We're setting the index to a value of 1, and we're going through a quick loop just to say, all right, here's the global field, and we're going to get the index. That's an error that should say the word index. So we're going to get the index repetition, and we're going to clear it, and then we're going to increment the index. Stop when we've got to 10, and that 10 could be a variable number as well, and clear all of those. Now, the other way that we could do it, and this is probably a question on opinion, this script does exactly the same thing. We don't initialize the index, because the index gets initialized by the first exit loop, and then does the same thing, where it's searching for that index repetition and clearing it out. Question, which would you prefer, left or right? Which makes more sense? I mean,
I prefer right.
Which one?
Right.
The right. Yep. The right-hand one, saves you a line of code. But it also does make sense. And this is a little bit of a curious thing in FileMaker, that you don't have to initialize variables. People coming from other programming languages go, how did index get there? It wasn't initialized. And you could argue, right, this is my way of initializing a variable, but this effectively auto-initializes it, because the first run through this loop, it actually creates the index and assigns it a value of 1. So it's a more efficient way, I suppose, of writing that same script.
Hey, to make it a horse race, with all due respect to Vincenzo, I'll say I like the left, and So now it's 50-50. Anyone want to break a tie? Also, I think Monkey Bread, which I use, little shout out for Monkey Bread there, will on the when you initialize the variable, it won't put like a red, hey, variable's missing. I can't speak from experience as to what it would do on the right, but it's 50-50.
Mm-hmm. Darren?
Two things. One, I worked out how to raise my hand. On a Mac, it is Option Y.
Right.
Not Command Y, Option Y. Secondly, if you were looking at this script, if you've got a design, I'm going to not call it a design pattern, but a coding pattern that you try to declare as many variables at the top of the script as you can. Obviously, the right doesn't follow that process. And so that would be the issue. And if on the right, you are assuming the index is a counter and that you weren't starting your counter at 100 for whatever reason. So that just limits its functionality. Just 2 cents being added.
Yep. Kent?
My comment with the one on the right is somewhere along the line, someone else will come and add an index further up in the script and not see way down 105, and it will break your 105 line because you haven't reset it back to 0.
Absolutely. And that would be my point about this, is that the left-hand side is more explicit in saying this is what I intend the index to start from, whereas the right-hand side just assumes that the index didn't exist in the first place, which may be a bad assumption, particularly if you're doing a number of these loops on the way through your script and not explicitly clearing the index after every loop. So, yeah. I just present those as two different slants to the same thing, and there are good reasons for going on the left.
0 index with JSON arrays.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't mind the 0 index or the 1 index. It's just the potential that index may not be what you expect on the right with the right option.
Yeah. I think there is a good reason to initialize variables in FileMaker. And that's what line 105 does on the left. It initializes the variable with a value. Sometimes we're initializing variables with an empty array when we're doing JSON, or we're initializing them with an empty object. And I think it's a good programming habit. So I would tend to, personally, I would tend towards the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side. Okay, naming variables. A lot of people, myself included, have used $I for ages because I is programming, and it shows that you're a smart programmer, apparently. I have deferred to this after what Nick Orr said at Reconnect, and I'm going to name all of my I's index now on. It's a very small difference in the amount of time it takes me to create it, and it's explicit rather than the coded name, and it's also easier. I have actually run into problems when I've had nested loops where I've had to have multiple indexes running at the same time, and I've ended up going $I, $J, $K, but I could go index 1, index 2, index 3. So I think that makes it easier. And no one ever knew what I stood for anyway, so it actually stands for index. So in terms of naming variables, I would certainly defer on the side of a more explicit name than a shorter name. Okay, exiting loops.
Well, I guess I'd have to argue with that and saying, well, why not tell you what's it the index of? Like, is it the count of, the number of fields or rows, or is it
if you wanted to do that, I suppose you could come up with another name other than index. But I would say the bad name in that is I, because it's probably not a good name for anything. Exiting loops. This is a very common thing that I see these days and that I use all the time, and that's the exit loop if statement, letting the index increment and just testing it against some kind of counter. So this is two steps in one. Rather than having to set the variable and increment the index and then exit loop if the index is greater than the count, we can do it in one step like this. There is a level of cool factor about this to say, look how cool I am. I'm using a let statement to do one thing and then test something else. But it's also very efficient. So I would know my convention within ULearn IT is this is how we exit loops with counters. We never do it with two steps. Then we've got the exit after last, and that's a question of which one of these two do you use? So the entry-level way of exiting a loop, if you're processing a set of records, is simply to have a go to record request page next, exit after last, and it works. So that's the way that it tells you to do it in the manual. But the right-hand side is the way that a lot of people are doing this now, where they're testing whether they're on the last record to start with and exiting if they are, and then they're going to the record next after that if that failed. Question is why you would bother doing that, and the simple answer is to avoid the error message that comes from exiting after the last record when no record is found. And that can be a problem on server-side stuff particularly, because the way that go to record exit after last on works is it requires the error to actually exit the script, being that the record is not found. So you avoid that error altogether. Question is, the eagle-eyed may notice that this is still on. So why is that on when I don't need it anymore? Anyone?
Just in case, right?
Just in case. It's a belt and braces approach to programming to say that it should never be used, but if something for some reason did go wrong, for some weird occurrence, it did go wrong, and I threw myself into an infinite loop, and I had that error off, exit after last off, then I would never be able to get out of that script. So it's a sort of belts and braces approach, but that script step in that circumstance should never generate the error record not found.
I guess if you had your all your errors under control, then that would pop up on the server and that would give you fair warning. But that wouldn't help me much because I have like gobs of scripts that won't do it the way on the left, and so I get tons of those errors.
Yeah, I've sort of forced myself into the habit of doing it on the right. Again, this is not, you're adding an extra script step here, but I've forced myself into the habit of doing it on the right now as a standard. Okay, here we go. Here's some more controversy.
It looks like Kent has his hand raised.
Kent, sorry. You're on mute.
Maybe he stepped away.
If Kent doesn't ask, I have a question.
Yes.
Or actually,
sorry. I'll unmute myself and then I'll ask my question. David, on your exit loop example, you gave the example of let index plus one count. I'm going to say I always use that option and I use neither of the bottom two. And my answer is you will never end up in an infinite loop if you do an index counter on your loop. But you may still end up in an infinite loop even with get record number equals get found count if something is preventing you from going to the next record in your loop. And I've had that happen when a loop was modifying a field which was failing validation because there was a date wrong. And even though we weren't editing that particular one, our loop was unable to get past that record.
Wow. Excellent.
Whereas the exit index will always exit your loop regardless of whatever situation you may find yourself in.
So you process a set of records without on the basis of an index rather than the record count, or
well, basically, I think your note where you go exit loop if let is pretty much our standard for any loop.
Right. Okay. Even processing a set of records. Yeah.
Yep. Pretty
Excellent.
much.
Yeah.
Never end up in an infinite loop with that one.
Right. So you would so this would be the count would be sort of get found count.
Yep. Which you would set at the start.
You would just drop that in here instead of that exit loop. Yeah, excellent. I never thought of that. Good point.
Very cool.
That is pretty much our, especially on server, but that's pretty much our go-to. One time I had a database with a corrupt index, and that one is introduced me to the fallback of the get record number equals get found count failing, which was a very interesting one to debug because it was all server side. But yeah,
perfect, good point. Catastrophic policy.
I had another.
Sorry,
David. Yeah, I wanted to bring this up because I keep asking for this, for years now. But there's a log on the server, script event log, and it will log all the errors that you get when you perform script on server or a scheduled script or but you're getting. So in the case of the one on the left, where you get to the last record, it'll log that there's no next record, right? And so you get an error log there. The thing I'm trying to get Claris to do is to add all the scripts in any client to get logged on the server. And this would be like some kind of debug setting that you would set on a file. And then even if clients were to get errors on script steps, those would go to the same log. And then you could run all kinds of tests through a staging server or something. And then you just look through the log and you see, are we getting any errors that we need to look at? And then you could suppress, whatever errors are innocuous errors, whatever. But it would slow things down, but it would for sure have in one place all the errors that you get from all clients. And I don't know if anybody else agrees with me, but that would be a huge thing to be able to get.
I agree.
Hey, let me jump in, Vince. I've got a side tangential. I don't think I just posted a link to a feature that's similar, but I think it's not what you're talking about. And I'm going to post as soon as I find it another link. I'm doing a bit of a deep dive to try and figure out how to make use of the FileMaker 18 feature set error logging.
Yeah, well, that came about because David McKee had some time on his hands, and it kind of looked to address the issue I was bringing up. But the problem with that is there's all kinds of problems with that. Like, a client can like you're writing to those errors locally and they're going to be in your format, not in the format of the log on the server. Now you've got to kind of consolidate the errors that your clients have been getting. And then, clients, and then you got to find the timing to be able to send those to some place on the server where you collect them.
It doesn't solve the problem you're mentioning. I am going to post the link because it's an imperfect solution, and I gave some thought, and I'm actually posting it because I want to get feedback from this esteemed group. John Mark Osborne opened a thread, and then I commented 4 years later, and I have a tentative method for addressing the concerns. That said, I don't want to hijack the awesome presentation, so I'll post the link, and I'm going to stop talking.
Dave's got a question.
Yeah. I wanted to add that a loop isn't necessarily records, because I will routinely loop a list. of values or JSON array or, there's several things that may be looped over values. So you can't do that go to record request page. So you do come up with that alternative.
Yeah. So that's where you're exclusively using the exit loop if and the comparing it to accounts or something like that. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Controversy. Global variables just don't. My question with global variables is you really, really need to use them. And here's a case in point. It isn't as bad an example as was previously sort of suggested by Darren. But I've inherited this system and it has 97 global variables in the data viewer. What it means is that every time I go and troubleshoot a script, my data viewer is full of global variable rubbish. And I have to pore through all of that stuff, at least scroll down the bottom of the list to get to the stuff that I really want to see. Now, that may be obviated by having an improvement to the data viewer where you separate global variables, local variables, and fields into separate tabs. But the point is that global variables just gum everything up in terms of trying to troubleshoot and seeing what's going on. And there is really, in my opinion, no reason to actually use them. So the question is, can you simply use global fields for what you want to do there? You look at this and say that there are 10 global variables here in the data viewer purely because there are 10 repetitions of the same global variable being actually used and filled up. So I could get rid of all of that stuff by simply having a global field called option label and filling that up in the repetitions whenever it gets filled up when the system gets initialized. So I could get rid of all of those global fields. There's no reason for any of those global fields to be there. They can all be in the global field in my globals table. If for some reason you do insist on using global variables, if you think, I've told people in courses previously, if you're thinking that you might need to use a global variable, give me a call, shoot me an email, ping me on Slack, and I'll counsel you out of it. I don't really think that you should do it. I remember years ago, the person who actually was in charge of putting global fields into FileMaker didn't use global variables into FileMaker, disagreed with the use of global variables, but it was his job, so he actually put it in. But he said, I'll put these in there because they've been asked for, but I'll never use them in programming. To my horror, people are asking for triple $ variables and saying we want file globals instead of just session globals, and go, that's even worse. So I would like to know if anyone has a really good reason for using a global variable over a global field. And there are a lot of reasons why you shouldn't use global variables from a security standpoint as well.
Is there any performance difference?
No.
I would use it only for something that needs to be like short-lived, right?
Yeah.
There are cases where I would have them shown as merge variables on the layout, and it's easier, not to have to refresh the window or things like that with a local variable. It's a bit iffy. Sometimes you can show a local variable as a merge variable. It's just again, if you don't want it to disappear from under your feet, then the global can be helpful. But yeah, just get it out of the way once you're done with it. And the other thing is, if you have something that you really need to be portable, right? It lets you free yourself up from dependencies on the schema. So those are really the two things. But so I'm not going to be saying never using it, but make sure you have a very good reason to use it.
I think that's the point, is to have a very good reason to use them. And I certainly agree with my second point there in terms of removing them when you've finished. People will often instantiate a global variable and then they'll forget to clear it, and they'll just sort of keep it there, and just because it's going to go when I go home anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It's a question of whether you really need to use a global variable for those things. There was the horrifying thing that I've seen in the past is that people use global variables for setting security preferences. And I showed someone at a DevCon about 12 years ago how to reset a global variable through your data viewer without full privileges to the file. And the fact is that there is absolutely zero security around global fields. There is no way that you can stop people getting access to those global fields global variables, if they know the name of those global variables. Whereas obviously you can do some level of security if you need to on certain global fields. I wrote an article quite a number of years ago with a controversial title, and it said, the title was something like, "People who use global variables are just lazy." And part of the contention there was that people were using global variables because they couldn't work out how to pass a value from one script to another, and also how to pass a value back from that script to the calling script. So that was the sort of main contention behind people using global variables being lazy, because they said, all right, well, no, I need this in that script over there, so I'm going to put in a global variable and it'll be there for me when I need it. But those people generally never cleared their global variables at the end. And obviously, the other problem that can run up there, as the same with global fields, is that if they contain a value that you're not expecting them to contain, or you stomp on that value with a future script, and you expect that previous value to be there, that can be a problem, and that's much less likely to happen with global fields. Okay. I'm happy to continue that conversation at some stage, but that's my contention. The data viewer, the watch tab is a very useful thing to you, and there are, in my opinion, a whole bunch of things that you should have in the watch tab. And these are a few examples of things that I've got in the watch tab. So I've got things like the get active field name and the get active table name from that. So it gives me a fully qualified field name of the field that I'm in right now. And I've found that very useful to try and work out which table occurrence a particular field on the layout is going to, rather than me having to actually, as long as I can get into the field, obviously, rather than me actually having to get into layout mode, double click the field, see which table occurrence it's coming from, and see what the name of the field is. In browse mode, I can simply click in the field and I can tell what field that is and where it's coming from. Things like knowing the found count and the total record count without the status bar up are useful. Things like knowing the name of the window, because obviously you give every window an explicit name, and the layout that it's using and the table occurrence that layout uses can be useful. Knowing the width and height of the window is very useful, particularly when a window isn't quite big enough or is a little bit too big to try and work out, or when you want another window to be the same size as that window, to try and work out how big that window is. Getting the file name on the host name, so making sure that I'm using the right file on the right host, because I have a development server and I have a live server. And sometimes I look at the live server and I think I should change that. And I think, oh, hang on, I'm on the live server at the moment. Even though the file name is the same, I'm on the live server. So I can check my data viewer to see that I'm working on the right file on the right server. Knowing what application version you're using, host name, host IP address, host version, and even this one, the script name and the parameter, while you're running a script to actually say, what script am I running again? While you've got the data viewer open, although no, the script debugger actually tells you that information anyway, but it's in the list of all the other things that are there. So I imagine that people who are using the data viewer in this way have a lot of these little calculations that they have at the top of their data viewer watch tab that can be very useful to actually be able to see what's going on in your system at a glance. So certainly recommend that. Does anyone have any calculations that they use there that I'm missing out on?
Hey, David, I do something similar. I have a little button. I was doing something for a customer and I was confused about passwords, account names. So I used a bunch of the get functions, put them as layout symbols on a little popover, underneath the little ask for help button. And then you click and it's like many of the things that you have here. So something similar to what you're doing. But this is interesting to think about.
Obviously, with this one, you don't have to be on any specific layout. You don't have to have a popover or anything. So it's separated from your layouts and things. Yeah.
I'm going to try and find, I have an Apple script somewhere. FileMaker occasionally crashes. I don't know if people have noticed that. And it wipes out the data viewer. I think I might be able, no promise, to get the Apple script to populate the data viewer.
Yep. It happened to me just the other day again.
I've heard rumors.
Yeah. Okay. Controversial thing, testing for a related record. We all know that many versions ago, if you went to a related record and there weren't any related records, it still went there. It just had a found set of 0. That behavior changed, I think, in version 7. And if you go to a related record and there are no related records, it just errors out with a 101 error, record is missing, and it stays on the current layout. So instead of just going to related record and assuming that we've actually gone there, we need to test whether a related record actually exists or not. So there are a number of different ways to do that. Firstly, you could try going to the related record and then test whether you actually got there or not. So you could test whether there was an error 101, in which case it failed, or test whether you actually changed layouts, in which case it didn't fail, or if you're on the same layout, then it must have failed. My preferred method is to test, and then if the test passes, go to the related record because I know it's actually there. So there are a number of tests that you can perform. You can go is valid on the related field. You can go count on the related field. You can go not is empty on the related field, or you can go exists on the related field. Exists being one of my custom functions, which is basically equivalent to not is empty. So exists as a custom function is in every database that I create because I really hate writing not is empty as a double negative. So the question is, of those tests, which one would you do and which one would you definitely not do?
I wouldn't do the count. It's an aggregate. If you've got a lot of data, I would avoid that.
The count is probably the heaviest because you actually have to physically count all the records. If there's one or if there's a million, then you're going to count all those records. So count is probably the worst one of those.
At one time, I thought Jimmy Jones explained the difference between is valid and is empty. The purpose of is empty was better.
Mm-hmm. Is empty is actually better because is valid is actually wrong. I've got another slide on that in a moment. I see people using is valid all the time, but it's the wrong use of it. It only works by accident, and it's not the right thing to use. Personally, I use the last one. I use it exists, and if it exists, then I go ahead and do the related record. Question here then, do you actually need a relationship? I want people to think about shaking their addiction to GTRR anyway and using relationships for everything. FileMaker is a relational database, but that doesn't mean you need to use relationships for everything, because effectively a go-to related record is actually simply a find based on a match between a couple of fields, based on what your relationship has set up. So it's just a find. That's all it is. And if you perform a find instead of go to related record, there's a lot more that you can do than you can do with a relationship. And it also simplifies the relationship graph. So the process is simply to store the required data, whatever keys you need, whatever values you need in variables, go to the layout where you can find that sort of record, enter find mode, set the fields, perform the find. So you look at something like this, and this is where it's being used. So this is part, obviously, of a much longer sort of script, but you can see up in line 10, I'm getting the active field value, and then further down, I'm actually using that in a search once I've gone to a product variation layout. So I'm finding the product variation that the user actually selected and the field that they're in at the moment, and this is a script that gets triggered on modify of that field. So rather than having to set up a relationship between potentially 5 or 6 different tables to their product variation table, I can just say, well, I don't need a relationship. All I need is what you're looking for, and I'll go and find it for you. And then down in line 25, once I've found a product variation, I find the product ID of that variation, and I go off to a component layout and I do the same thing there. Once again, I don't need the relationship between those two tables because I'm just performing a find. So I'm effectively doing a go to related record, but I'm just doing a find. There's nothing special about these finds that's anything more than a GTRR would do. It's just that I don't need to clutter up my relationship graph with them. So please consider finds rather than GTRR as your default. Question on this script. I've actually gone to different records and I'm just gathering up information there. And it occurred to me when I was looking at this that I should probably just be dumping all this into a single variable. And once I get down the bottom to create a new record, I just get it out of the JSON. So I think that could actually tidy up that script a lot. Okay, this is it. I think isValid is the most misused calculation function. It doesn't do what people think it does. At least it's not intended to do what people think it's intended to do. If you read the help, this is what it does. Is it returns false if a field contains an invalid value, because of a type mismatch. So, for example, you've got text in a date field. Maybe text has been imported into a date field. This will work. It will return 0 in that's invalid data. It will also return invalid if it can't locate the table where the field is defined. It will also return 0 if a field has been deleted from that table, from a related table. Otherwise, it returns 1. Now, in fact, otherwise it returns 1 is not true. It does return 1 in a lot of other circumstances, but they're not documented and they shouldn't be used that way. So if you're, for example, using isValid to test for the existence of a related record or data in a related record, then that's not what it's supposed to be used for. So don't. Having said that, I mean, systems that I've inherited use isValid, and I'm gradually changing all the isValids to not is empty or exists. Custom functions. We have a whole bunch of custom functions that we all use. Here are some of mine. So the exists custom function, as I said, is one that I use all the time. I'll just copy that into every new file that I come across. If I inherit a file, I'll copy that into that just in case I need to use it. IsNotDev is a useful custom function to have to test for visibility. You can apply that to visibility of things so that non-developers don't see things that they're not supposed to see. Null is a useful custom function. GetID is a custom function based on getting the primary key of the current record on the basis that all of your primary keys are named ID. The list custom function is a good one to be able to convert a standard list into any list in terms of just defining what the separator is going to be. So you can turn a standard list into a comma separated list or a pipe separator list or anything you want. Get last value is a useful custom function to have, obviously, to get the last value off any list. So it just counts the number of values and gets the last one. JSON count keys I have there because I always forget how to count the keys in the list of JSON. So I have that in there. I asked Clay actually whether we'll ever get a function for that. And he said, yes, as soon as they decide on what the name of the function is going to be. Alphabet is often a useful custom function just to have all the letters of the alphabet available to you, and similarly with digits. Getchar works in much the same way as getValue, in that it's saying, well, get me the second number or the third number or the fourth number. So it's an easier way to extract a single character or a single word out of a string. So for your reference, here are some very useful functions that I put into most of my systems. Layouts, we're almost there. Buttons and popover buttons, please don't use those. Please make button bars your standard object. There are a lot of reasons to use button bars over buttons. If you need a button, simply create a single segment button bar and you're done. The difference in the style sheet between buttons and button bars means that if you're using both, you have to maintain multiple style sheets. Whereas you can have everything in the style sheet for your button bars. All of your buttons are effectively one segment button bars. They can have a calculated title, and that used to be much more useful than it is these days, because as of 21.1, layout calculations have actually finally become useful. Because they made a change in 21.1 where if you change the field name, the layout calculation changes, where it didn't used to before 21.1. Any segment in the button bar can be either a button or a popover, so you don't need to choose. You can just create something. If you want to change a button into a popover or a popover into a button, you can do that. And it's very easy to add another segment. You can have multiple segments. You don't have to worry about multiple buttons and sliding them together or hiding them or whatever. You can individually hide individual segments, as you saw on that record selection example, where I've got 3 segments in the button bar, but the conditional visibility of the segments is such that only one of those segments shows at any one time. And I do have an ally, in Matt Navarre. He started up a new series of posts, and one of his first posts is stop using the button tool. And so if you read that, he goes into more detail about each of those points I've made there. But I just wring my hands whenever I open up someone's solution. I see a combination of button bars and buttons. Eric.
Matt Trusky made a comment I was kind of interested in hearing what he had to say about that, about button bar states.
The button bar states don't apply to button actions. Managing inactive and inactive states not necessary in the layout calcs are now fixed. Yeah, definitely the layout calcs are now fixed. Button bar states don't apply to button actions. I don't know what.
Sorry, is my audio working?
Now it is.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yep.
I was just, there's when it comes to button bars, I'm of the opinion there's too many complications with regards to the active and inactive states that you must set. Plus, you must set what the default segment should be represented, and that comes along with an additional calc. So that's just a lot more to. The more button bars you put on your layout in order to facilitate a simple button click does not justify the extra management that comes from the inactive and active states and the fact that you have to manage the segments. Given that layout calcs now allow you to access fully dynamic buttons. So the buttons have a place and button bars have a place. And using single segment in place of button bars has been obviated now because of layout calcs. That's just my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that, Matt? Again, why?
Is it because you're using the layout calc as the button label?
Correct. You can now, with a standard button, you can use a layout calc as the label of the button, which gives you full access to the calculation engine. Whereas when you look at a button bar, as soon as you set it up, there's two primary settings. One of them is on the button bar setup, and it's the active segment. So that active segment you now have to manage because the inactive and active states of a button bar are going to abide by that active segment setting. So that's an additional hassle that you have to deal with in your UI, where a button doesn't do that because it doesn't come with the extra states. Because a button bar is attempting, well, it has to account for which one of however many of me are there. Now, if Claris made logic such that you went down to one segment and then they no longer applied the active and inactive states, then fine. That would be a great argument. But otherwise, just having to, from the solutions that I've done, having to set up and manage those additional states is not worth it to me, given that I now have a calc engine on a regular button.
So you would make a text object with a layout calculation and format that as a button? Yeah.
Like in your button now, all you really need to do is the option F will make you that layout calc. So it's basically, less than option F, type your calc, and then close it out with your two greater than signs.
Okay.
Let me jump in.
So
I'm sorry, go
it's
ahead.
not a separate text object. It's the actual button label that gets defined as the like the merge format calculation type thing.
Yeah.
Oh. I think that's something that I didn't know. I didn't know that you could actually put a layout calculation in as the button name.
Yeah, it's pretty neat. Just do the, I forget which one is which, greater than, less than, I think left, less than. So it's less than, option F, put 2 plus 2, and then close it out. And it works just fine.
Or just create a layout calc and then just copy it and then paste it in.
Yeah.
Same thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if anyone publicly said that you can do that with a button label.
Feels like a hidden feature.
Let me jump in and say I want to give a shout out to the buttons. This is kind of obscure, but I measured they're 17% less pixels. Which is whatever. The one thing I like about buttons and button bars, using both, is in the style palette. There's like 23 or 27 spots without scrolling. So if you have X number of buttons, if you divide the load between the buttons and the button bars, and that you don't have to scroll. The final thought that I have with popovers We use, because popovers have a different behavior, where you click and pretty much nothing happens other than it displays something that you could ignore. It's kind of like the ... and the Apple human user interface guidelines. They're very safe. So I like them. It's another spot on the style palette. And I do a circle just as a convention to differentiate them from buttons or segments, and sometimes a ... but not always, but just circle indicating to the users, like, you can click this, you can see what's behind this popover. So all of the programmers at FileMaker who made those 3 different kinds of buttons, I think you all did a terrific job. Little controversy.
Okay. Always save layout changes automatically. I see a lot of people doing demos and they change a layout and they go back into browse mode and they get this, do you want to save the changes to the layout? So they just click save or press return and go there. Ever since we got undos being preserved across layout to browse to layout, there's no downside to actually saving the changes on the layout. So I would always have this box checked, or go into your preferences and check this box explicitly so that you can save the layout changes. I don't need to be asked if I want to save layout changes, because I can go into browse mode, I can have a look at what the layout looks like. If it's not right, I can go back into layout mode and undo those changes and then save it explicitly. So I've got the Command S in layout mode to make an explicit change to that layout, or I just go back into browse mode and it saves it for me anyway. Another tip here, just adding, particularly where you're working with multiple people on a solution, it's always useful to have developer notes in your layouts. So these are simply text objects which use a particular style. So I've got a couple of different developer styles, effectively like post-it notes just sitting on the layout, and all of those are set to hide object when 1. So applying that in find mode means that the only place that you will ever see these developer notes will be when you're in layout mode, which is exactly when I want to see them, because it might be another developer who has left me a message to say, do we actually need this here? Or how are we going to count these? Or we need to do something else here as well. So you can leave little notes for yourself all over your layouts, and obviously clean them up when you address them. But it means that when you go into layout mode, you can see a whole bunch of stuff that you might need to address. So that's a bit of a tip. So I conclude all of this by saying there's nothing wrong with being wrong. And you really should think about the way that you do things and have an opinion about the way that you do things. When someone gives you a good alternative, consider that alternative and drop your opinion like a hotcake if you find that you're wrong. So that's the weakly held part of things. Have an opinion about the way that you should do things. The worst thing that I see with developers is I ask them, why did you do that? And they go, I don't know. That's just the way I always do it. And that to me is the worst reason to do something. So have an opinion, have a reason why you do something, and be prepared to change that when someone smarter than you comes along and points out something different. Thank you very much.
Yeah, just one quick on developer notes. I will have really, really busy layouts. And so I've started putting them in a popover button. Again, you could just put the text in there and then you can, toggle back and forth looking and then reading the notes and, kind of give yourself clues of what you're actually referring to. And so then it helps to have the notes. And again, the hide condition.
Good tip.
Yep. Good tip.
Jim's raising his hand. Nope, Jim's not raising his hand.
No, I had unmute. Sorry, from the mouse plate. I was unprepared to mention this at the time, but I do have another use for exit script, and that is I'm using it in an application that has multiple different files as part of the solution, all of which have to remain open in order for the solution totally to work. And that's happens to be for my company's emergency operations center. And we have different positions, and each one of the modules has to be updated independently because we're having constant changes. So we set it up with multiple files. So if you create a script that you execute through the script trigger of on last window close, and you toggle the value of the parameter in the text result for exit script between 1 and 0. If it's 0, it will cancel the window close. If it's 1, it will not cancel the last window close. And why that's important is that so many users were initially used to closing windows to hide them because of the multi-screen layout. They were working on laptops and they couldn't, use a larger monitor. And so they kept clicking the close button, either the red button on the Mac or the X on the Windows. And that would log them out of the solution of necessity. So what I did is I added that script, and with a conditional parameter and using a global variable that's set through accessing each file that determines whether or not to exit the script with either a 1 or a 0. So that global is called allow file to close. And it's normally set to false so that the exit script on last window close will be 0, and clicking that X button or the red button on the Mac window will not close the window no matter how hard they try. So the only time that global does get set to true is when the user attempts to log out of the script or log out of the database under control conditions when I want to allow them to, in which case then it goes ahead and propagates that value through all of the files and allows all of the file solutions to close. So that is, again, that's another use of exit script with the result depending on what happens. So I guess that also means you have to be careful if you have something that evaluates between Boolean 0 and Boolean 1, and you exit, you could have an unanticipated result if there's also an action nearby that closes a window.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely.
That sounded very cool. I wonder if custom menus, I know you can trap the close menu command. I wonder if that fits into the mix, but I'm going to have to listen to this again. Listen to the recording.
Robert, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Well, thanks, Dave, for your presentation. There was something that came up on a slide. I thought you would bring the topic in a different slide altogether, but I was a bit surprised. There was one slide in your scripting samples where we saw a halt script step, and I thought you would want to discuss that more, but it didn't happen that way. So
yeah, that halt script step was in a script that wasn't mine. That was in a where was it? That was in an inherited thing, and I could have another slide in here to say never, ever, ever use halt, but I wouldn't say never, ever. Sorry,
We've been debating this one for multiple meetings. I don't think we'll ever get an answer. I like it.
I think it was the script tied to the keystroke script trigger.
All right. Okay. No, that is mine.
I think Clay coded that script step. I made that up, by the way.
So down there, the whole script. Yeah. reason for that in this circumstance was that in this particular system, when I open up a card window, I was opening it up and pausing the script. And so what I wanted to make sure of was that if you close the window as a result of an escape, that it actually effectively didn't need to resume the script. You didn't end up in another window where there was a pause script. There's probably more code that needs to go around that halt script step to see whether you are currently in a paused script, in which case I want you to halt everything or not. But I feel very, very bad whenever I use a halt script. I think I've used it probably 4 or 5 times in my life.
I feel bad to the bone when I use it. It's like slang. It's bad. Good. Sometimes.
How many times have you used that halt script, Tony?
I think it's a good debate.
10 times today, right?
It just kills the whole stack. Sometimes it's a very efficient single line. I'll leave it at that. And everyone should listen to the back catalog at DIGFM. There's times when, listen, my favorite use case is a subroutine that I call, it's a single line validation of state. Tagging back to what David said about if is empty. If I've got 5 fields top of the script I want to fail early, I can do that with a single line, and that script has a halt, and it kills the stack. The calling script, it kills the calling script with a single line. Well, long story short, I recommend it.
Yeah, I was using it at some point to stop the cursor following the tab order on the layout, and I wanted to stop the user to go from the current field to the next, even though I was validating the leaving of the field. And I found that halt was the only thing that would really stop it from going to the next field in the tab order. But I'm a little hazy on exactly the use case and how long ago that was. I think it goes back to the T-shirt of the repeating fields are evil from previous DevCons, that there are use case for repeating fields, particularly for the display of data. And like David was saying, that his globals table, it's not a data table as such. It's a presentation of data type table, and it's a one-off. So again, know the function, know when to use it, know when not to use it. To quote Kenny Loggins, there's a T-shirt.
Yeah.
I've got a couple announcements. I want to make sure before everybody leaves. One, I put a link into the chat. WIT-FM gives away scholarships, and the scholarships are open. We're going to close it at the end of this year and use it for people going to either the Engage or a lot of the events or trainings throughout next year. So please encourage people to apply for that. And we are especially looking for somebody within the APAC region. We have the Shin Memorial that we would love to use. So there are 2. The one that goes to anybody can apply, and the other one is just within the APAC region. You can attend any conference, but we need to find people to apply from that region. And then the other announcement is Claris Engage that's coming up in March. It's going to have a museum because of the historical significance of the number of years it's been around. So kind of get your thinking caps on of what you've got that might be handy. We will have a list posted of where you can submit items. We can have shipping to the actual venue. If you've got photographs, and a PDF, we will have slideshows going so that you don't have to bring your, Mac and showing, FileMaker 6 on it or something, or 2 on it or whatever. So kind of think about things if you would like to help donate to that, whether you attend the conference or not. So thanks.
Thanks, Beverly.
So that was awesome, my opinion.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you all.
I mean, yeah, it got a lot of conversation going. That was great.
I think we could have had a whole session on that first slide, David.
I think so. Yeah, they could have been.
Yeah.
Hey,
A couple of those items were actually featured in Matt Navarre's featured duel that we used to have. And actually, apparently you sided with the majority there on 2 of those. The find instead of go to related records, and the using the global fields instead of the variables.
Yeah.
But I think those were the majority opinions.
Oh, hey, on that topic, I haven't done it to the data viewer clutter issue that you mentioned, David. I haven't done it, but I thought it was a good idea. It's like, oh, maybe I should have a JSON object and just get and set into the JSON object, so it's only consuming 1 line in the data viewer.
Nice.
Maybe I'll do it one day.
Global JSON, huh?
Well, it's just a field called JSON settings, or whatever the heck you want to call it. And then, rather than setting to a global field called application version or whatever, window name or whatever, you just get and set using the FileMaker 16 and up features.
So a JSON called globals?
It would be, wait a second. It's a global field into which you would place a text that would be formatted JSON. Actually, whatever. You all know what I mean.
That makes sense.
With repeating fields.
Yeah. Arrays, right?
Yeah.
Well, I would go with an object with key values.
And a custom function.
Although since y'all brought it up, the use of an array, same concept, time and a place for that as well.
Yeah. We talk about finding the right method, but it is a difference between implicit or explicit programming, that we're setting the state of what we're doing. And back to the first slide, if you're in school A or school B or group A or group B, it needs to be clear to the next developer that that's the method you've used and that's what you need to go on with. Nothing worse than following a method and then finding someone else has taken over for 3 months and used a completely different method. And you don't know which method at what stage has been used, and it's just chaos.
Yeah.
And that would sort of say that if you took over a system that was wrong, or again, no one's against what you're used to doing, and if you're going to move forward in a different method, really decide what impact it's going to have. And is the client going to get any benefit? And you go and changing it all to your method to find out there's no change in the behavior of the code, or there's some line that flips the switch.
Yeah, I think when you're working with someone else's system, it is a question of, if I change all the is valids to exists, is that going to make a difference for the system, or just for me not having a heart attack every time I see is valid? So it might just be in that case, it might just be a personal preference, but every new script that's going to be written will have exists. So it's just a question of consistency, I suppose.
For those customers,
you can simply collect
Oops. But yeah, I don't know if you could see that, but there's the votes.
Yeah.
For what do we have? What do we have today? Global variables versus global fields.
Ooh.
That's pretty close.
And I know, not too close for David's comfort. And then, and what was the other one?
GTR.
Oh yeah, perform fine.
Yeah.
30 to 18 on that one.
Hey, I do have an obscure thing. I dropped a link to a custom function. I had a customer who had field content that had some of the special characters that are used in Find. So the pattern that I had for a picker where I read the contents of a field and performed a find. I got it right. I think I got it right on the 4th version, escape for find. So I dropped a link, and if people hit the ... you'll get, all the things people dropped links. But you know what I mean? They had like a part number with a hashtag, and then when I copied it and then tried to find on it, it was wrong. It was escape for find. It's on the Brian Denning website. I'm very proud of it.
The only question with the go to related record compared to doing a find, to present the data in a portal for the GTRR, does that mean that data has been cached before the step to go to those records? And even if it's not, just a slight performance difference between going to records that are already displayed on a portal on that layout that it's been cached compared to going and doing your fresh search. I know both are based on stored data because you can't have a relationship that's not unless the portal's filtered and you go to the portal and then go to the filtered portal for the related records. Just a thought. My big one with performance is whether or not you take a date field and convert it to number and then work with it, because that's supposed to be faster. But I don't know anyone's brain to convert a 8-digit number to date when they're trying to troubleshoot that sort of thing. I can see if this number is greater than that number, but when you're trying to troubleshoot a script based on doing searches on dates, it's easier to keep it as a date.
Yeah.
And then to use pluses as part of your date format for international.
Yeah. I think for some of those things like converting dates to numbers for performance really needs to have a significant effect, not a minor effect. It needs to be like, 1 second instead of a minute.
Yeah.
So, otherwise, it becomes a little bit of, I do this because I think it's faster, and microseconds mean something to me. You go, right. So,
and I think that person's probably using each SQL too.
Yeah. And curiously, those sort of people do all of that sort of stuff in optimization, and then they use unstyled objects on their layouts.
Yeah.
You just go. So you're going to optimize the hell out of this bit just here, and then you're just going to let the layout do whatever it wants.
Will did some testing at one point. Sorry, go ahead, Darren.
No, I was just going to say, and they then haven't even thought about the UI that the user can't find the button to then run the script. It's so much faster than everything else.
Yeah. Okay.
That was all rinse.
Yeah. Will did some testing with script comments, and he found that script comments have some overhead, like really, really small overhead. And so he decided he's going to put all his script comments at the end of the script. Right. And I'm like, oh, no, don't do that.
Wait, is that, and he thinks that's going to... there's a performance hit of stepping over.
Overhead is only at the beginning then.
The overhead is because the way the script is structured, it has to loop, it has to run through the commented steps. But in the some of the patterns that we use is single pass loop. You get to the end, then the script exits because you're exiting out of the single pass loop, and the comments are then after that. So you never hit those comments in execution of the script.
So you download them over the wire,
you download it because you download the script,
but you don't step over them.
You don't step over them, but I mean, I would say, yeah, it's kind of like the same thing that David just said.
Are you saying like don't do that, just never do that, or just don't bother changing all the comments that you already have?
I would never do that just because it's like, yeah,
you kill your readability and you pick up a nanosecond.
Yeah.
Well, why are you putting a comment in? It's for the next developer. Okay, before you run this through the debugger, scroll all the way to the bottom, read all of this, get the context, scroll back up to the top, and then step through it. Or run it and then see what the comments actually match what was done in the script, because the comments were probably from 4 years ago because she forgot they were all down the bottom and you didn't update it when you came to the top.
Well, I mean, David said something about proximity, right? When you're reading the thing, you not just like how you declare your variable and then have things like be close to each other. It's like comments. They're part of the code in not for how the computer deals with it, but for you. You're reading the comments as part of the code. So
The other thing that I see happening a lot is, okay, so let's say the comments are at the top. Then I've seen oftentimes where you'll have the purpose of the script, you'll have some parameters incoming, parameters outgoing, and then you'll have like created by and then modified by. And then the modified by goes over and over and over and over. So every person that touches the script is like, they'll put in their line, they'll put in their timestamp when they modified it, what they made, what changes they made. And so that keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's why I like that at the end.
That should be in line, proximate, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, like I remember, what was it? AppleScript. Didn't AppleScripts have like a place where you could put like the comments, not in the script editor, right? There was some like, am I remembering this correctly? Does anybody remember AppleScript?
I mean, I use AppleScript every day. It's you can put, I mean, the standard instead of / for the single line comment.
No. There was maybe I'm thinking of another editor or something, but there was a place where you would put comments.
Put them on the website.
So Vince, are you suggesting that we wouldn't be adding comments for like a modification history, and then we'd use inspector instead, for instance?
Oh, God forbid. No, but maybe the next version, you never know. If we got get functionality, who knows,
Yeah.
Maybe you might want to do that. So
have you got the box there of your latest book? Just with the inspector? Just happen to have one there?
Yeah, but I mean, look at Claris, what is it, Claris Connect? Like, Claris Connect has like a whole change history. Like, if you go far enough along and then you decide, oh, you know what, like 2 hours ago, my code was working better. Let me just step back, right?
Yep.
Wow, that's such a different paradigm. It's, Anyway.
Eric, I see Eric's being attacked.
My face eaten off.
Okay, well, I need to shoot off to another meeting.
Thank you so much, David.
Yes.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Great.
Yeah, I'll see you next month.
Okay.
Now we need a nomination for next month, yeah.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, David.
Bye, Dave.
Bye, everyone. And thanks, everyone, for attending.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Vince.
And we'll hang out till the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually,
we'll close the bar.
hey, hold on. I held myself.
Stop the recording. Wait, stop the recording.
All right, stop the recording.